Hey, how are you out there? Today, our show will be about two things: vinyl and record store day. They go together like glue, by the way. And our guest today will be author of several books and the new one, Record Store Day, Larry Jaffe, who is also co founder of the famous Making Vinyl event, which Judith and I judge every year. And Jack White and Michael Kurtz, co-founder of Record Store Day, were keynote speakers in the 2017 event. And I want to read you a quote, by the way, from this is the first book, Larry. Remember it?
Yeah, I edited that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful book. You did a great job. So our friend Jack White has a quote here. The size, shape, smell, texture, and sound of a vinyl record. How do you explain to that teenager who doesn't know that it's a more beautiful musical experience than a mouse click? I love that quote, Larry. And also in the keynote speaker was our friend Michael Kurtz. And at that time, he wrote a quote in the book that you have in the book, says, the timing for making vinyl is perfect as new pressing plants are springing up all over the U.S. and around the world to meet the demand. New vinyl factories going into production will help reduce the backlogs of orders as independent record stores and labels have experienced in recent years. And I'm going to mention several things before we get into the interview that are backup to what we're talking about. I got a Billboard issue in October 2021 with a full-page vinyl article. And it said, first time since 1986, vinyl sales by 2022 should reach $1 billion. They also mentioned the Lady Gaga and Paul McCartney 2020 album, which is very important because the vinyl sales boosted those albums up to number one, and a number of other artists that they mentioned also. So we're talking about the increase of vinyl sales. We're talking about things like that. The new Record Store Day coming up, April 23rd, will have a couple of special things I want to remember. The album Detective, which Michael DeBoris, who's friends with me and Larry, got the tapes from a great story. He got the tapes from Jimmy Page, and he put the album out now, which originally was on Swan Song. It's now going to be on Org Records. And by the way, Org Records is mentioned in Larry's book. We'll talk about that later.
Well, also, by the way, Spencer, I wrote the liner notes to that record.
You did? I didn't know that. Oh, that's great. So I'm getting a copy, but I haven't got it yet.
I haven't received mine yet either.
Yeah. But, okay. The other album is La Cruzada by Alexandro Escovedo, which is a limited edition album. And by the way, that album got a Latino award. And I want to show you an album Judith and I actually designed, Magic and Loss, which came out on Record Store Day in the past. It was a 7,000 run, and it has 2 vinyls in it. So these limited special editions, such a big part, as you know, Larry, to the Record Store Day, which you write about. The other thing I want to mention also, I want to thank Larry in my life because my 45 RPM book in 1992 was the first visual history of the 7-inch sleeve ever published. And every publisher company turned it down except for Princeton. I couldn't believe this. But Larry Jaffe wrote a very positive review on the book. And the book sold the first year 10,000 without any promotion. And by 2009, sold 22,500 worldwide and led to our 545 book in 2010. And I want to mention this because Larry has this intuitive notion of seeing things that happen. And he does that with vinyl. I call him the mover and shaker of media writers, to tell you the truth. And also, I want to mention Record Store Day, which will be mentioned later, kickstarted my vinyl design career further. I mean, had an influence on all areas of music, pressing, mastering, vinyl designers or music designers. And so my life has been broadened out by that. And I want to read a couple of book reviews before we get into the crux of the interview one-on-one with Larry. Gareth Murphy, author of Cowboy and Indies book, and also the ghostwriter for Siren Song, which I have a link to because it's the autobiography of Seymour Stein, which I designed for Sire Records. The quote says, "A complete and colorful book that needed to be written. Hats off to Larry Jaffe, who stepped up to give us the definitive history of a phenomenon that changed the course of independent music, saving not just thousands of stores, but easily as many indie labels." The next review comes from Darrell W. Bullock, who authored 3 books. I've spent much of the time in my life in record shops, observing the world from both sides of the counter. Larry Jaffee's book really captured the atmosphere and importance of the independent record store and the fresh injection of life given to the trade by Record Store Day. I also want to mention that Mix Magazine, April 2022, had a review of the book, and also Record Collector News, March to April 2022, had a review of the book and an interview with Larry. And I just want to mention that as before we get in, because this is such a phenomenal book. We'll get into the crux right now, and later at the end, we'll talk a little bit about making vinyl. So I want to ask you first, Larry, what inspired you to do the book?
Well, it was basically a phone call from Michael Kurtz, who's one of the co-founders of Record Store Day. He and I had been friends since 2015, and he realized the 15th anniversary of Record Store Day was coming up. He had been following some of the writing I was doing about the revival of vinyl. I think I wrote my first article in 2016 about that subject. It sort of bothered me that the mass media was, in my belief, underestimating how big the resurgence was. And this, I mean, I realized this back in 2016, that it had to be far bigger than that. And then the next year is when Brian and I co-founded Making Vinyl, and we brought Michael Kurtz into, that equation. In fact, we had a very important meeting at a steakhouse in Manhattan to sort of hash out what Making Vinyl would be about. Yeah, and so also at that meeting was Steve Sheldon, who was the owner of Rainbow Records, a big manufacturing plant in California.
Yeah, I like your quote. Record Store Day is a celebration of record stores. I mean, there's about, 1,500 record stores involved, plus worldwide others? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, there's probably about 1,400 in North America, and it might be up to 1,500 now. I wouldn't be surprised. And probably about twice as many in the rest of the world.
I'm going to mention several things in the book and just expound on it. One is CDs make vinyl comeback possible.
Yeah, I was thinking what you were saying, Spencer, about how vinyl was important to you.
Yeah.
But it was also important to your career when CDs first came around. Because I remember when you and I first became friends, you would tell me how you were redesigning for Island Records in particular all their CD covers, right? So that made a lot of money for you at some point. But what I meant by that was CDs led to people getting used to paying twice as much money for what they already owned in a different format. So, so remember when CDs first happened, in Australia, it might have been even more, but in the US, the first CDs were about $17 to $18. Then some of the discount places started almost giving them away as lost leaders for like $9.99, but that was below wholesale cost actually. Now, one of the travesties about that is that it was very cheap to make a CD. It was like way less than $1 to make a CD. But where did all the money go? Not to the musicians; they went to the labels. So,
Right.
but at the time, and the book actually gets into this history.
Yeah.
The record industry was losing young people who were more interested in playing video games than listening to music. So they needed something like the CD, like the portability and the convenience of the CD. So I think it really served a good purpose, and it gave me a job too. I mean, I for 8 years edited a magazine that covered CD and DVD production.
Yeah. Interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would get into articles like the plastic jewel box, throw it away. There would be all these articles, Larry, about get rid of the plastic, and then board came in, which I really expound on. I love board because it's more of a, but the size, if you got into the limited edition area, like we did the metal box for Lou Reed and Peel Off Banana for Velvet Underground, and there's a whole bunch. Those areas were really great. I mean, that's like designing a outrageous logo or business card. But doing a CD, it just, for me, fell apart also. I mean, it just disoriented graphics, piecemeal,
Well, I once interviewed Robert Crumb about this subject.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I said to him, is the problem the size, like with the CD? Because we had an award winner, best CD cover, and it was Beyonce, in fact. And he said, well, you put a pretty girl on the cover, that's always going to sell. But he hated the typography. And he's like, what is this font? Right. You can barely read it. It's illegible, So that was at the point. I said, well, what about the size compared to the LP, the 12 by 12? He said it has nothing to do with size. He said, and then he showed me examples of matchbook covers that were like this big.
Right.
And he said, look at the graphics on that. Look at the typography, hand written, the calligraphy. And he said, that's a design. What's masquerading as, graphic design today is awful. He blamed computers for it. I'm not sure if I completely agree with him. He's right about the aesthetics, but I think computers can make.
So this is a cover we did, Judith and I recently, we entered in making vinyl. But anyway, the point of it is, when you see this image on a CD, Larry, it's not I look at this and then I see it on CD, I said, oh my God, it's such a day and night to see it on a vinyl. You know what I mean? The impact, the impact, right? The digital image.
Well, by the way, you mentioned Lou Reed before. He also says something very interesting about CDs. He hated jewel cases. He goes, those crummy things, as soon as you drop it, it breaks. And he was absolutely right. And he said he came up with the idea, why can't you put a CD in the middle of an LP, like a gatefold LP with like a little pocket?
Wow.
So he came up with this solution. He would have loved this rebirth of vinyl. It started. He passed away in 2013, so it was a little, it was already a bit back.
Yeah.
But he didn't see all of his records being reissued on vinyl, like through Record Store Day, like it was the last few years, like you mentioned.
Well, I've got like, I worked with Joan Jett for several albums. I had Kenny Laguna on an email today, and he said, I can hardly wait to see this interview. I mean, he's a real vinyl freak, if you know Kenny. I mean, when I did different things for Joan, there was vinyl 45s, and of course you had the regular vinyl 12-inch. But Kenny, who's, such a historic figure in music, a writer and manager of Joan, when I mentioned this show, he went crazy. Larry?
Yeah, no, I think Crimson and Clover is one of my favorite all-time cover versions of anybody's songs. Yeah, Joan did an amazing job on that.
So the next one is limited edition vinyl worked.
So what I mean by that is I just have to go back to the history of how the LP got killed in the first place. Vinyl got killed.
Yeah.
It's because they wanted to usher in the CD. Okay. And they basically stopped taking returns on LPs. And you mentioned Billboard before. So in the book actually opens with a November 1991 headline about how the major labels are not taking returns anymore on LPs, which is basically the death knell, like almost like the final nail in the coffin about its future. So, but they did take the returns on the CDs, and as a result, that made sure that CDs were going to be the format of choice. There was that middle period in the late 80s that the cassette was the most popular configuration because of, they were ushering out the LP and ushering in the CD. But that by the 90s, it was all CD. Right. So what I meant by that is when the Record Store Day co-founders came up with this idea about bringing back newly pressed vinyl, they realized it couldn't be the record industry of the old. But the labels basically told them that. Right. They didn't want to have anything to do with returns on LPs.
Right.
It's like it's your problem. So basically, it's a one-way transaction, and you need to. So almost by design, they weren't going to press mass quantities of these limited edition. I mean, it was decided to be a limited edition. Like quantities in the beginning, like no more than like 3,000 or so. Now, I think what happened was Jack White around, 2013, 2014, he had a very successful solo record. And he sold, I think in the book it mentions at the time when I was interviewing Ben Blackwell, who's the president of Third Man Records. Yeah. At the time, it was like 250,000 units of the LP. That's since been eclipsed by a couple of different artists, like Adele and Taylor Swift and Harry Styles. They're selling major, and that's really one of the great things about the future of the business. Yeah. The younger demographic is also gravitated to vinyl. It's not just the legacy artists that we grew up with.
I mean, you have a quote here with Alan Lupi, is it 2006? CDs are dead.
Well, yeah. So the industry, again, I said the industry, the record industry, the labels were basically trying to reinvent themselves. So they instead gravitated towards Spotify and streaming services. There was that middle ground, like the same way cassettes were like this bridge. Briefly, iTunes and Apple with their downloads, made a big splash with the iPods and all that stuff. But that didn't last. I mean, and I remember being at a new music seminar, and Tom Silverman was predicting wildly about the acceptance of streaming services. And at the point, this was around 2015, and I was like, really, is that going to happen? I mean, I wasn't convinced. I mean, even when I was at a magazine called Media Line, which ended in 2006, we talked about the celestial jukebox in the sky. And I never really thought for $10 a month I would be able to get literally that. But I mean, I have a Spotify subscription. I've thought about canceling it because of what Neil Young was talking about a few months ago, which I agree with him. The musicians, it's ridiculous since a company that's traded on Wall Street like that and is valued so high globally, don't pass that money along to the musicians. But musicians make more money from their vinyl sales, guaranteed, than they'll ever get from streaming or even CDs, I believe.
You're right. I totally agree with you. The next thing I want to mention is folks behind Record Store Day, Kerry Colleton and Michael Kurtz. Tell us about that.
Okay, so this came out in the research when I interviewed both Michael and Kerry. They worked together at record stores, going back 30 years, and like in the 80s, and maybe longer than 30 years. And Michael then, while he was at one of these record stores, started like a consortium, a coalition of independent record stores. It was called Music Monitor Network, and also he published a magazine for those stores about what new releases were coming out, and I guess they had reviews. And then they started conventions, and they had all the stores come across the country, to their events. In the book, there's a story about Sam Phillips in 2002 being at one of these Music Monitor events, and Sam had just visited J&R Records, which was a big store we had here in Manhattan, and said, these people really, they're the bedrock of popular culture here. Society needs them. You'll never find more hardworking people. And basically what he was doing was predicting, and Michael didn't even think of this at this stage, because that idea really didn't emerge for another 5 years later, when two different store owners were talking about, we need to create some excitement about vinyl. Well, actually, one of them pushed vinyl. The other, what they both had in common was they both sold comic books. And they were saying, the comic book publishers create excitement and have a single day where people come to their stores. And why don't we do something like that for record stores? And one of them noticed that their used bins were being bought up. As soon as the collections would come in, people would buy them. So Eric Levin in Criminal Records in Atlanta, who had his own coalition, which was separate from Michael Kurtz's, he came up with the idea that, maybe we should, get the labels to, see about pressing new records. I mean, right before Eric had that conversation with Michael also heard from Chris Brown at Bull Moose up in Maine, a chain of stores. And he was saying, like, let's create some special holiday,
Wow.
Chris wasn't so certain. He wasn't that much in favor of doing vinyl at that point. He goes, what are you talking about? We sell CDs. We don't sell vinyl. So he was skeptical about it. And even Michael admits that now that he was skeptical.
Wow. That's interesting.
I mean, he says he almost got fired when he brought up the issue.
That's funny. The next one I want to expound a little bit about, because in my life, Warner Brothers was a very open label. They had an incredible art department, but when I did for Lou Reed or design for Marshall Crenshaw forever, they said, okay, do it. If the artist is happy with you, do it. So I always had Warner's as this label, very open-minded. So when you write about RSD gets Warner's backing and blessing, it was like a no-brainer for me. I said, that would be the label of all of them that would jump in first, Larry.
Yeah, Grover Brary was the president of Warner Brothers Records in around 2007 or early 2008, when Michael Kurtz approached him and said, well, we have this idea, will you help us? And he said, yeah, we're thinking along those same lines. And in fact, while he was there in the office, they just showed like a test pressing of Neil Young's greatest hits that they were putting on vinyl. So you're right. I mean, Warner looked at it much differently than the other majors. So, for example, Universal had just sold their record pressing plant in upstate New York.
Yeah.
And Bob Irwin's a friend of mine from Sunday's Records. He was also a Sony reissue specialist. And he was buying up the rights to like the Dylan catalog and the Byrds catalog. Because Sony at the time wasn't interested.
Yeah.
And I remember interviewing Bob around 2002. And he's the first person who said to me, vinyl will come back. I guarantee you. He goes, it's no accident that if you turn on a television commercial, you'll see a turntable playing. Why is that in 2002 that you see stuff like that? So he was right. He's absolutely right.
That's great. I love that. You also have in the book Lars Ulrich from Metallica giving
yeah. So I mean, Michael Kurtz and Record Store Day had been gathering musician endorsements of what they were doing.
Hmm.
And then they came up with the idea of having like an annual ambassador.
Right.
So at one point, Metallica became the annual, I forgot which year in particular. You mentioned Jack White before. So Jack was one of them as well at that point. But yeah, Lars had, talked about growing up at a record store in Europe and how much it was important to him.
So this is what I'll read. RSD Ambassadors, 2009, Jesse Boots Electric Hughes. 2010, Joshua Homme. Ozzy Osbourne, 2011, 2012, Iggy Pop, 2013, Jack White, 2014, Chuck D, 2015, Dave Grohl, 2016, Metallica, 2017, St. Vincent, 2018, Run the Jewels, 2019, Pearl Jam, 2020, Brandy Carlisle, and finally, 21, Fred Armisen. But, the list is very awesome. And I think that's a great thing. These people of great stature supporting it,
Well, it's a shame that we couldn't, I guess there was a print deadline. The 2022 ambassador this year is Taylor Swift.
Oh, wow.
Which that's really widened the scope.
Really? Yeah. And then you have a great chapter. I love this chapter. Musicians' testimonials since 2008 on record stores. And you got the list: McCartney, Chris Frantz, Wilco, Joan Jett, Springsteen, Mellencamp, etc., etc. That was a nice chapter to read on those quotes from these different musicians, Larry.
So again, that was not my research, as it was Record Store Day had been compiling this for since for the past 15 years. So that's how we were able to get that in the book.
Here's interesting. London Calling and France. Talk about that.
Yeah, so there was always this, if you go to a Wikipedia page, it's not completely accurate. But basically they said, well, it started in the US and then it moved to England because Michael Kurtz met Billy Bragg at an airport leaving South by Southwest.
Wow.
That portion of it was true, that they met, but it wasn't like that's how England got into Record Store Day. The reality was the international expansion first happened in Canada around the same time that the U.S. started. It was in a small, there weren't a lot of stores in Canada that were doing it, but there was some participation. Then there was, so the first Record Store Day had already taken place, and Spencer Hickman was involved with Rough Trade, the record store in the UK. He managed it, I guess, in the UK. And so how do we get involved in this? We would love to participate. So Michael eventually, said, well, this is what we're doing in the US, and we would like you to follow the blueprint that we established. So Spencer was open to that. Another Spencer, by the way. Right. and then after that, France similarly, well, actually before that, Holland, I think, came in before France. But in France, the situation there was a lot of friction with Universal initially, because they had an existing relationship with a big retailer and in France, and they had already planned exclusive product for that retailer. And meanwhile, Michael told David Godavis, who was overseeing the French stores, you'll be able to get the same releases as we can, in the US. Yeah. Now, the funny thing also about this is Michael tells David, I'm coming to London. You want to meet me there? So David gets on in one of those trains, thinks he's just going for the day. So Michael meets him in the lobby and he says, all right, follow me. And next thing he knows is they're going into this boardroom and there's a whole bunch of people there. And David didn't know who, he thought it was a one-on-one meeting between him and Michael. So Michael introduces him to the rest of the group and says, "Oh, this is David. He's representing Record Store Day in France." And David's like, "I am." So then Spencer Hickman at the store, at the meeting, says to him, "So how many stores have you enlisted to be a part of this event?" And David doesn't even know what he's gotten into himself into. So out of the top of his head, he says 100.
Oh my God, that's funny.
David speaks English well though, so it wasn't like there was a language barrier or anything like that. So now the funny thing is, when he went back to France and he started, explaining the concept to everybody, he did get like 100 stores in that first year. So but the other interesting thing at that meeting, well, a couple of things happened. David said, "Well, I'm not going back on the train that I thought it was going back later today. I'm going to stay here in London for a couple of days." I guess he had to buy clothes, But so Michael took him to some of these meetings with the labels in London. But then at that meeting, David said to everybody, well, I guess he said to Michael specifically, he said, "Look, we can't call this Record Store Day in France because it means nothing to the average French person. But you could call it Disquaire Day." That's what I like to call it, Disquaire Day, because I guess that's the French translation for disc. And so that's how that happened. Then the interesting thing about that, in Britain, they objected initially to call it Record Store Day because they don't call their, and I wonder, if Jason, if this is true in Australia too, they say, "No, we operate shops." So, but at some point they let go of that issue. Like, Britain did not continue to say, "No, we have to call it Record Shop Day." That didn't happen.
That's crazy. So let's talk about some of these record labels that are so vinylized. Let's start off with our friend, Jack White, Third Man.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So I was hopeful to get Jack to give me an interview for the book, but we just weren't able to get that because of his schedule. But Ben Blackwell, on at least 2 occasions, gave me really in-depth interviews. And he told me this really funny story. So Third Man was opening their own store in Nashville. And they purposely set the open date to be about 11 a.m. instead of like early at 9 a.m. or something like most stores do on Record Store Day. And the reason for that is because him and Ben Swank, one of the other principal, executives at Third Man Records, wanted to go shopping for records at Grimey's, the big store in Nashville.
Wow.
so that's why they set it up. But then the other funny thing is, Third Man Records, the retail operation, is much different than your average record store because the only thing they sell is Third Man related or Jack White related, or White Stripes related. They're artists. So that first year they were totally ill-equipped to operate a retail operation.
Right.
So, for example, they didn't have a cash register. So everything, they didn't have any way to even take credit card orders.
Wow.
They had to do everything in cash. And so he said that they went into like Third Man had this closet that had all the old White Stripes tour merchandise, like T-shirts and stuff like that. So they put that all on sale for Record Store Day.
It's great. I sent Jack our 545 book because White Stripes is in it. You're just a communication. This was before making vinyl, I believe. So I don't expect anything. I just wanted to give it to him. It was such a big thing with him. And I get 2 weeks later a box of 45s. He's thanking me. A box of 45s from Third Man, really great stuff, But, I can tell where he's at, the communication level. Not that I have to meet him. It's just.
Yeah, and Ben has explained this to me, that Jack doesn't do, so we're planning the new Making Vinyl in Nashville in June. So I've been going back and forth with Ben about getting Third Man involved because they have a plant and they have the recording studio and mastering studio in Nashville.
Yeah.
So I said, and they have a performance space too. So I said, well, maybe you want to get involved in this. I said, what's the chances of Jack, because he's in between the two legs of his current tour. So I said, what's the chances of Jack, coming? It's almost 5 years since he last spoke to us, our group. So Ben said, Jack doesn't do anything twice.
That's funny. So the next label we'll talk about is my friend Jeff Kleinsmith, who's art director for so many years, Sub Pop. And they've been doing it since '86, vinyl, right, Larry? I mean, they're just really...
Yeah, no, they were one of the early that never stopped pressing singles, for example. Another label that I think fell into that category was Epitaph. Now, a lot of these the independent labels were founded, like in Epitaph's case, Brett Gurwitz was a musician. Right. So he wanted to sell records for his band.
So tell us about Concord. I spoke to Donna Ross. She says, hi, Larry. Tell us about Donna Ross and Concord. You have some quotes from her in the book.
Yeah, so Donna Ross is an example of a label executive who Michael Kurtz, said, here's somebody really good who's seen, the trajectory of vinyl coming back. She earlier in career worked at Capitol Records. She worked at a company. She had a consultancy, and then she also worked at a company that worked for doing marketing for a lot of labels. But she gave me this quote that said, basically, if it wasn't for Record Store Day, we wouldn't be having jobs right now. The physical business would be done.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was a very important to write about that. It's a very great info thing. And of course, Org Music, which we were talking about, Detective and whatever.
Yeah. So Andrew Rossiter runs Org right now, and he talks about how important Record Store Day is, for his whole year, essentially. They're very selective in what they put out. Some of it's jazz oriented, in terms of reissues. But it's interesting. I'm working with Andrew on a record that I was involved in, sort of back in the late '70s. My friends had a band that was signed to Elektra Records. They were called Wowie. They were very popular in the tri-state area, and I did promotion for their independent singles, and would go to radio stations and jukeboxes. I was in college when I was working with them, and the record didn't come out for a variety of reasons.
Right.
So through Facebook, I was back in touch with, in 2020, like when we're all basically lockdown, I somehow became back in touch with the bass player. I hadn't talked to him since 1981 was the last time I saw him. And the only reason I saw him was I was back in touch. I met the guitar player from the band on a train, and we hadn't seen each other in a couple of years. So it was really funny to run into. So I said, well, how do I get in touch with Peter? So, Peter invited me and played for me this record that never came out. And it stuck in the back of my head.
Yeah.
So I was telling Andrew about it, and he sounded kind of interesting. So Peter sent me some MP3s of the tracks, and he said, I think I want to put this out. So we've been negotiating with the manager of Wowie, with Warner Brothers. It took forever to find the master recordings, but they did. Now, and I hopeful. I don't know if it'll happen this year, but we're trying to get it out this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I got a quote here from Iggy Pop. I love this. Larry, this is incredible. It says, as Record Store Day ambassador of 2012, I feel like a representative from some exotic jungle full of life and death and sex and anger, called upon to wear a leopard skin and translate joy to the world of the dead. I mean, only Iggy would write that, Larry?
Yeah, no, he's very deep. I mean, my favorite album of his is in French. I don't speak French, but it sounds really profound. so I no, I love Iggy, and I was a big Stooges fan from the first time I heard them. So yeah, no, he was a great ambassador. I mean, he took it seriously.
Yeah, and he is. I've heard him at 92Y with a Q&A with Jim Jarmusch, which is incredible. I never forgot that. But I met Iggy at a book signing, and he has our 45 book. He loved it because Mick Rock, took pictures of him. Unfortunately, Mick has passed away. He loved our book, and Iggy's a very special person in the music business. I totally agree. You have a write-up on record stores, which was great. You have Waterloo Records, Amoeba, Vintage Records. Tell us a little about that chapter.
Okay, so yeah, the Waterloo Records is interesting because I was trying to get their owner, John Coons, for a while on the phone, and it took a while to set that one up. So I finally do this amazing interview with him, and the next morning I wake up with my eye completely shut and I have lesions all over my forehead. This is how crazy I am. I knew something bad just happened to me. I don't know what it is.
Wow.
But I did this amazing interview. I don't know if I have is life-threatening. I was running on adrenaline or something.
Oh, my God.
So I worked for 3 hours before going to the hospital.
Oh, no.
To get that interview into the... And so I saved it and sent it to Michael Kurtz. I said, you really need this. I'm going to the ER. So I get to the ER and Michael calls me. He goes, what's going on?
So whenever somebody mentions that, it's like rings your head, Larry,
Right.
And then I'm going to end with the Record Store Day Growth by Carrie Colleton. Talk about that.
Well, we had the pandemic for the last 2 years, and the stores had to change the way they were doing business. And so some of them, everyone was pretty much closed for 4 months.
Yeah.
But some of them were able to continue to do e-commerce, if they were like at a warehouse or something like that. And others, like for the first time, put up a website. So much to, I think, everybody's surprise, the sales continue to grow even amid the pandemic. Now, part of that is people were looking for something to do at home, and I think that helped spur the whole interest in vinyl.
Yeah. I think that whole pandemic thing really got people a whole different view, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, what's going on at the same time is demand is at such a peak that there's a demand on raw materials. And, even before that, in February 2020, before the pandemic even, there was a fire at the one of two lacquer suppliers that are needed, to create a vinyl record. Luckily, the company in Japan, the surviving one, the other one was in California, managed to step up their production. That somehow they're supplying the entire world with these lacquers. But on the other hand, it's rare for like test pressings to be made like they used to be.
Really?
So I wonder about the quality control sometimes in some records.
Is there still a backup with pressing plants with production of albums?
Yeah, I mean, generally it would take like 10 months to get a record. On the other hand, I mentioned Nashville before. 3 new plants are coming online in Nashville.
Oh, great.
So Jack White had, urged the major labels to get back into the business. That wasn't going to happen, but other companies are jumping into it.
Yeah, we did a Nashville album, and I gave it to a pressing plant, and they had a really fast schedule, but this was like 2 years ago, Larry, and things have changed. So I think what we're going to do, I want to ask you, first of all, where can people get your book? Very important. Where can they get your book?
Well, it should be available at independent bookstores as well as online places, the usual places. I hear sales are moving really quickly. I mean, it was only released on Tuesday, but there were pre-orders going back to December.
Great.
Actually, I should show you the book. I'll show you.
There we go.
Yeah.
There it is right there for you,
There
Larry.
you go. Yeah, that looks a lot even better. I also have, now this was just for the US market, but I think your audience is global, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the deluxe one is this.
Oh, yeah. It's a biggie.
And there's a record attached to that, but there's a limited edition. It's only on the 1,100 copies are going to independent record stores in the US. But people like McCartney, Billie Eilish, Brandy Carlisle, Pearl Jam.
Wow.
Imagine
That's
Dragons. Great. Yeah, no, it's a nice cross section of artists, and that's a record store date release. It's live performances at record stores.
Can you get this on Amazon?
What, the paperback book?
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have the paperback. I don't know if they have the other edition. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about making vinyl, because that's coming up on June 23rd, 24th in Nashville. The Packaging Awards, by the way, Judith and I judge it every year. We're very honored. Incredible packaging. I mean, it's just like crazy. It's like the 1970s die-cut era reborn. The amazing entries were really a lot, right, Larry? And the packaging, very intricate, incredible stuff. And that you can see the winners of this year on makingvinyl.com. People want to see the list of winners. And there's also, we know, register now. You can register now for the event. It started right away. I got an email from Brian, right, Larry? And so I want to tell people that. And I don't know, is there anybody want to add anything? Plastic? Do you want to?
I just want to say, isn't this fantastic here, the logo that you got there, Making Vinyl? It really stands out. And to my mind, I want to say, Spencer and Larry, when you look at the industry of the vinyl record, right, and you've got to put other factors into it. For example, I know myself in Australia that your record store, even starting, let's say, from the 50s or the 60s, was an institution. That's where you went to get music that you haven't heard, that you discovered artists from. And this is where, for example, in the US, when Tower Records ended, it was like part of your culture disappeared. And that's why people were really upset. It was like, how can I say, a member of the family died. Because during the disco era, for example, you had the vinyl that was like 12-inch maxi singles, right? And I know people that still collect those and they will not part with them. They're like part of the family. And also getting back to CDs, we've got to understand, you can't play a vinyl record in a car. I mean, we're talking now not the Italian little players we can play 45s. You can't play albums. So that's why CD has got its, its import. I mean, I only play CDs in my car. I remember playing tapes, and people remember playing 8-track where the tapes used to break and they used to put over on the side of the road and put them together with glue to continue playing it. I mean, you've got to understand, everything is part of the culture. I can give you an example. This younger generation, like I have a son, 25. He just got into vinyl now. I try to explain to him. When I bought a record, it was $7. You're paying $50, $60 for a great product. It's a superior product as far as I see it. Because in the 60s, they just mass-produced everything and you bought it. There was no choice. Now today, this younger generation want beautiful-looking covers, beautiful-looking paper, really nice colored vinyl, limited edition things. So the market has actually expanded. But, most of this new generation, I'll give you an example, a 45 single. My son said to me, how do you play this funny looking CD? I said, that's not a CD, the 45 record. I said, that's played on a record player. So really, they got no idea. And everything is an education. It's like Spencer deals with the covers. The artist cares about the sound. It's like you've got this process that no matter what happens with the formats, for example, it's very important that file sharing experience, for example, one of the pioneers was Napster. right? I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
But that was when the threat came to vinyl records, because it's first time computers, you were able to download songs. And then, as I said, then that progressed to your streaming services, the ones that are paid and the ones that are not paid. Now, Larry, I ask you, when you look back on American culture, you know how important the vinyl records are, even with as I said, when it turned down and when then it started again. And it's always going to do that. But let me say this, the people that sold their plants, their record pressing plants, I mean, when you think about it, that was a mistake, because it came back so strong that whoever got those plants ended up buying businesses that were bargains. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. But I wanted to get back to what you were saying about, the record store being sacred ground, basically. I mean, this is where people learn about music, but they also meet friends, bandmates, future spouses, possibly. It's where you learn about life. And I know that was true for me.
I mean, I'm an avid 45 and LP collector. I have a big collection, and as I'm looking for these sleeves all over the world to buy, there's an incredible amount of 45s, incredible amount of LPs. And I was at a new music seminar on packaging panel, and they said the two biggest things that are produced are 45s and 12-inch. That's it. Those are the two main things. And I really believe that, because I used to see so many 45s. I mean, it's incredible the amount of 45s that are out there too. People don't realize it. They more gravitate to the LP, right, Larry? You know what I'm saying?
They do. Yeah. But also, Plastic was just talking about with the equipment.
Yeah.
So when that machinery would go on eBay, there'd be like a bidding war now going after those things. I mean, in the book, there's a story about how Third Man was bidding against Furnace in Virginia for this.
Right, Furnace, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's going to get even better. As the AC/DC lyric goes from Australia, it's a long way to the top, but I think we're reaching that point. You know what I mean? It's like I think this is a vinyl. For me, as a vinyl designer with Judith, we love it. It's coming back. I had a big paranoia in the beginning, Larry and Plastic, about vinyl was going away. It'd be all computer. I was freaking out. Look what's happening. It's the best thing in our lives.
Well, I remember in 2013, Spencer, you sent me a magazine from Britain about the vinyl rebirth. And I had no idea that was really happening on that level at that point. I was very impressed with the publication.
Yeah.
That was when I first got the inkling. And I remember forwarding it to Brian and saying, hey, maybe we should do a vinyl conference. And he was like, at the point, he said, I think it's too soon. And he was right. I mean, he was right. And I think when we did Making Vinyl for the first time, it was the right time too, because Jack White had just opened Third Man Pressing, which was, a new era for this rebirth.
Yeah. I mean, that vinyl issue was really well together. It started off where he had done an issue on artists, different kinds of painters and cutting edge type people. And then he calls me up and then he tells me, I want to do something about you and Judith, what you've done, because he knew our profound background. And I didn't hear from him. And all of a sudden, this magazine comes out, Larry. It sort of evolved from that. He said, well, he probably thought, well, if I got them, why don't I try some? And then I turned him on to Jeff Kleinsmith, Joseph Arthur, some other content in the magazine. It's a really great magazine. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I was really impressed. I didn't know that. I was really an honor.
Speaking of art, it just occurred to me. So you see this painting above my head here?
Yes. Yeah.
So that was done in crayon by a friend of mine, an artist living in Paris named Matthew Rose.
Wow.
He had given that to me in the mid 80s because he knew how much I loved records at that point.
Yeah.
And I found it rolled up in the tube when I moved. And I was like, I've never framed this. I'm such an idiot. So that's why it's up there.
And my generation being, let's say, a Beatles fan born in the 60s, but I didn't understand the Beatles till like 1967. Oh. So what happens is every record Australia followed the British records. Like every Beatle record that's released is UK based. It's not American based. Where the Americans, they got the Beatle records and put out their own albums and their own compilations, right? That's why it's totally different.
Yeah. No, but Plastic, I got to disagree with you because I'm in a Beatles head right now because I went to Beatles Fest on April 1st and 2nd. So we were getting gypped. Like, we would only get 10 or 11 tracks at the most. The British versions would get like 15 or 16 or 17, 18 even. I mean, it was you got more value for those records. So the reason why those compilations would happen in the US is because they were just like, they lopped off arbitrarily songs from the UK records. I mean, I would prefer the way you had them, though, I think.
I also got to say, Larry, I like it how I hit a nerve with the Beatles, right? Because you jumped up. I like that. Now, I just got to say, with the Beatles, you got to understand this. I did a show. I've done a show on every single Beatle album with a whole panel, like Please Please Me, whatever. And there's one particular show where we said we want to know what the greatest Beatle album that ever came out was. Now, of course, we know the front runners. For example, you can go to the net and look at the polls, and I'll give you some of the albums that you would expect would be right up there, starting with Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, Revolver, right? They're your natural choices as being like, if you go to polls, they'll say Sgt. Pepper is like the greatest album that ever came out. But by the end of the interview, guess what album we decided was the greatest Beatle album that everybody went to? And it blew my mind. And it was actually the American version of Rubber Soul. I think
Rubber Soul, I was going to say Rubber Soul. That was a big change for them.
The US version.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, if I had to pick number one, it would be Revolver. Rubber Soul is probably every bit as good as Revolver, in terms of quality of the songs. I also love the White Album for its, being diverse. And I like, I love Abbey Road. The
thing is about the White Album, which is almost like the Rolling Stones double album, you know what I mean, is that it's a double album. First of all, it's a double album. There are no fillers. What fillers are, Larry. There are no fillers in it. It's really, or all songs.
Well, the Beatles
incredible.
didn't produce fillers, in my opinion, until Let It Be. I mean, that was like the first album that I was like, what are they doing here? And then, the movie. I wrote a review about Get Back, Peter Jackson, and then Peter Jackson spoke from New Zealand at Beatle Fest with Michael Hogg Lindsay, and they were comparing notes on how they made both of their films. It was fascinating listening.
I just got to say, Larry,
I
was fortunate enough to interview Michael Lindsay Hogg in July before the Get Back special came out.
Yeah, you did
then when the Get Back special came out, I interviewed Michael Lindsay Hogg again, and he was looking for the original Let It Be book, right? And I had a copy, and I sent it to him, and he was kind enough to sign it and send it back to me.
That's nice. That's worth a lot of money. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I wasn't interested in the money, but the stories he told about the Beatles were fascinating. And you know what it is? This love of vinyl, this love of music, this love of whatever format it is. There's so many die-hard vinyl lovers out there and collectors. It's endless.
In my life, I was lucky to design for John Lennon Imagine trade ads with Apple Records. And I also designed for MPL for Paul and Linda. So in my life, I've had two Beatles in my life, actually, which I was very honored, very lucky,
Yeah, I met two Beatles, Paul and Ringo, but I met three Sex Pistols.
Oh, whoa, that's really cool. Yeah, that's, oh my God.
Including, I was in the elevator with Sid Vicious when they broke for lunch, him and his lawyer and me.
Wow.
That was the only people in this. And I asked him, I knew he couldn't talk about the case. So he said, Sid, have you heard the new Clash album? Which had just come out, Give Him Enough Rope. And his lawyer said, don't answer that. And then Sid, this was really interesting. Sid looked terrible because he was going through a withdrawal. He was, he was on smack before that. So he was wearing this necklace with razor blades. And the lawyer somehow missed that during the early part of the day. And then he covered it up in the elevator. So
that's a great story.
Yeah, no, it's I
gotta say now, before we wrap it up, Larry and Spencer, if you'd be kind enough, Larry, to tell them where they can buy your fantastic book from.
Yeah, well, so Spencer, so I was up and down different bookstores. Yeah, Amazon has it. But if you go to LarryJaffee.com, I'll have the latest information. I mean, there's a local bookstore here in New York, which I'm doing a talk at. They're selling it. I mean, Amazon has enough money, but I know it's easy to get to. But yeah, they have worldwide distribution.
And you're Larry, you have a couple of events on Record Store Day, right? You're gonna be at.
Yeah. So in the morning, I'm going to get up 8 o'clock in the morning to with my list and go to Rock and Soul on 37th Street, and I'm friends with the owner there, Sharon, and I'm going to sign some books. She's ordering the hardcover book there, and then after that, I'm going to go down to Village Revival Records. My friend Jamal signed some books there. Then around 12 o'clock, I'm going to get on a train to Long Island and go to my friend Carl Kroger's Looney Tunes in West Babylon, New York. Yeah, so I'm going to put my itinerary will be on LarryJaffee.com.
Yeah, and Record Store Day is April 23rd, right, Larry?
Which is my birthday, by the way.
Happy
You
birthday,
can't even make this up. And then Plastic, you're going to love this. How old do you think I am?
You look young to me. I don't want to say an age, but you look under 40.
When I'm 64.
Hey, can I say something, Larry? You're not going to
can't
believe
make this up.
Larry,
yeah.
You're not going to believe this, and I won't tell anybody, but do you know how old I will be when I turn in July the 9th? I'll be 64 too, like the song. How's that? We're the same age.
That's
Born
great.
in 58.
1958. Yeah.
And I'll be 80 in November.
Now, listen, I just want to say, we've hit the hour mark. It's been a fantastic interview there, Spencer and Larry, and we really appreciate you coming on, Larry.
Thanks, Plastic.
In interviews down under. And as I said, keep watching our show because we've got some fantastic guests coming up, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show. See you again soon. See you, everyone.
Definitely.
Thanks.